The twin suns of new dawn were just beginning to dip below the horizon, bathing the colony in streaks of molten gold and crimson. The air was alive with celebration. Laughter echoed across the square, the scent of roasted grain and spiced meat wafting through the crowd. It was Harvest Day, the colony's annual festival marking another year of survival on this harsh, untamed world. Children darted between stalls, clutching sticky treats. Farmers tipped their hats to one another over mugs of frothy ale. For once, the settlers could forget about the dangers lurking in the wilds beyond the perimeter. Marcus Steele stood on the edge of the festivities, leaning against a post with his arms crossed. The soft murmur of the crowd was a stark contrast to the tension winding tight in his chest. Something didn't feel right. He couldn't place it. Maybe it was the way the wildlife had gone silent in the surrounding plains, or how the colony's automated turrets seemed to stutter as they scanned the horizon. His instincts, honed over years of service in the Outer Rim Defense Corps, whispered that this calm was a facade. "Relax, Steele," joked a tall man in a farmer's coat, nudging him with an elbow. "Even you can't be paranoid all the time." Marcus shot him a sharp look, his piercing green eyes scanning the man's face. "I'm not paranoid, Don. I'm prepared. There's a difference." Don laughed, a deep rumble that carried over the noise of the square. "If you say so. But tonight, we drink. Even you can't find trouble in a place like this." He raised his mug in mock salute before vanishing into the throng. Marcus didn't reply. His hand moved instinctively to the knife strapped to his thigh, his thumb brushing the hilt. Years of combat had taught him to trust his gut. Tonight, it screamed danger. Then it happened. A shrill, keening wail erupted from the colony's comm tower, slicing through the merriment like a knife through flesh. The sound was alien, unnatural, sending a chill racing down Marcus's spine. He jerked his gaze upward just as a flash of green light tore through the sky, shattering the comm array in an explosion of sparks and molten metal. Panic rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Screams rose as families clutched one another, their joy replaced with raw terror. Marcus bolted toward the central control building, shoving past fleeing colonists. His boots thudded against the dirt, the acrid stench of burning electronics filling his nostrils. "Stay calm," he bellowed over the chaos, his voice a whip-crack of authority. "Get to the bunkers! Move!" The power grid failed next. Streetlights winked out, plunging the colony into darkness, broken only by the flickering flames of burning debris. In the dim light, Marcus saw them, figures moving like shadows through the square, their scaled bodies shimmering with a strange, shifting iridescence. Xan Thar. He froze, the breath catching in his throat. He'd heard the stories, the whispers from survivors who'd escaped other colonies. The Xan Thar were hunters, not invaders. They didn't conquer for resources or glory. They hunted sentient beings for sport, reducing entire settlements to trophies and scoring tallies. And now they were here. Marcus ducked behind a stack of crates as the first plasma bolt streaked through the air, cutting down a fleeing woman in a burst of searing heat. The smell of charred flesh turned his stomach, but he pushed it aside. There was no time for grief, no time for hesitation. He had to survive, and more importantly, he had to fight back. A group of colonists stumbled past his hiding spot, wide-eyed and desperate. "The bunkers!" Marcus hissed, grabbing one by the arm. "Head east, stay low, and move fast." "But they're everywhere," the man stammered, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face. "Go!" Marcus barked, shoving him forward. "You'll make it if you keep your head down." He watched them vanish into the darkness, their silhouettes swallowed by the chaos. Turning his attention back to the square, he studied the Xan Thar. They moved with unnerving precision, their movements fluid and deliberate. One carried a plasma rifle with a barrel that pulsed faintly, scanning for heat signatures. Another wielded a net made of glowing, flickering threads, one that clung to its screaming victim like a second skin. Marcus's jaw tightened. These weren't soldiers. They were predators. He crept toward the control building, his heart pounding against his ribs. The air felt thick, oppressive, as though the colony itself held its breath. Every step was a calculated risk, every shadow a potential death sentence. He slipped through the shattered doorway of the building, glass crunching beneath his boots. Inside, the emergency lights flickered weakly, casting the room in a sickly yellow glow. The control panel was a mess of sparking wires and shattered screens. Marcus swore under his breath, crouching beside the console. He pulled a multi-tool from his belt and began working, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. If he could reroute power to the emergency comms, he could send a distress signal. A guttural snarl from the doorway made him freeze. Slowly, he turned his head. A Xan Thar stood there, its towering frame illuminated by the dim light. Its scales shimmered like liquid metal, its eyes glowing a predatory yellow. It tilted its head, studying him with an almost curious expression. Marcus's hand tightened around his knife. He rose slowly, keeping the blade hidden behind his leg. "You don't want to do this," he said, his voice low and steady. The alien responded with a sharp, clicking laugh. Then it lunged. Marcus sidestepped at the last moment, driving his blade into the creature's side. The alien let out a guttural roar, its claws swiping at him in a blind frenzy. He ducked and rolled, the adrenaline surging through his veins, sharpening his focus. In one fluid motion, he retrieved a fallen piece of rebar and swung it with all his strength. The makeshift weapon connected with the Xan Thar's head, and it crumpled to the ground. Marcus didn't wait to see if it was dead. He bolted toward the back of the building, skidding to a halt as another plasma bolt seared the wall beside him. The hunters had found him. "Damn it!" he growled, sprinting toward the emergency exit. The night air hit him like a slap as he emerged into the open. He zigzagged through the alleyways, the sounds of pursuit close behind. His lungs burned, his legs screamed for relief, but he pushed on. The bunker wasn't far now. Finally he reached it, a rusted hatch concealed beneath a tangle of thorny vines. He yanked it open and dropped inside, landing hard on the steel floor below. The heavy door slammed shut above him, sealing him in darkness. Marcus fumbled for the generator switch, the bunker flooding with dim light as it hummed to life. The space was cramped and cold, filled with old survival gear and outdated tech he'd scavenged over the years. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He sank into a chair, his chest heaving as he stared at the monitors. The screens flickered to life, showing the chaos unfolding above. He could see the Xan Thar dragging colonists into their ships, recording every kill with meticulous care. The rage boiled inside him, but he shoved it down. There was no room for emotion now, only strategy. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he began typing commands into the console. If the Xan Thar wanted a hunt, he'd give them one, but this time the prey wouldn't run. "This isn't over," he muttered to himself, his voice a low growl. Not by a long shot. The air in the bunker was stifling, the hum of the monitors the only sound as Marcus leaned forward, his green eyes fixed on the flickering screen in front of him. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing against his chest, a relentless reminder that every second wasted was another life lost. The Xan Thar weren't just hunting, they were culling. Entire colonies had been turned into trophies, their people reduced to nothing more than scores in a twisted game. Marcus's fingers danced over the keys, pulling up intercepted transmissions from the Xan Thar fleet. The guttural clicks and hisses of their language filled the room, translated in real time by a crude algorithm he'd cobbled together from stolen tech. Most of it was standard operational chatter, but one phrase kept surfacing, each time carrying the weight of grim finality. New Thurman, promising prey. His jaw clenched. New Thurman wasn't just another colony. It was a hidden sanctuary, one of the last bastions for refugees and resistance fighters. If the Xan Thar had found it, it wasn't by accident. They'd been fed a lead, likely from someone desperate or compromised. Either way, the result would be the same. Another massacre unless he acted. 2 weeks, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. He didn't need to finish the thought. 2 weeks before the Xan Thar descended like vultures, turning another human settlement into a killing ground. The bunker felt smaller now, its walls closing in around him. He could still see the chaos of new dawn in his mind's eye, families torn apart, the streets running with blood. He slammed a fist onto the console, the sharp crack echoing in the silence. No more. He wouldn't let it happen again. Standing abruptly, Marcus paced the cramped space, his boots thudding against the steel floor. The faint scent of oil and burnt circuits lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the bunker's fragile state. His mind raced, piecing together a plan from the scattered fragments of intelligence he'd gathered. The Xan Thar were methodical, but they were also arrogant. They believed themselves untouchable, invincible. That arrogance was their weakness, and he intended to exploit it. His gaze shifted to the corner of the room where the sleek, alien device pulsed faintly with an otherworldly glow. The DNA sequencer. It had nearly killed him the first time he'd used it, the pain unlike anything he'd ever experienced. But it had worked. He wasn't just Marcus Steele anymore. He was something new, something that could walk among the Xan Thar without raising suspicion. Moving to the device, he ran a hand over its smooth, glass-like surface. The material was cold to the touch, humming with latent energy. He had already tested it, shaping his appearance into that of a Xan Thar noble, a hunter, with crystalline scales and glowing amber eyes. The transformation was perfect, down to the intricate patterns etched into his artificial skin. But it wasn't just about appearance. He needed more than a disguise. He needed a persona, a story that would get him inside their inner circle. The monitors flickered again, pulling his attention back to the console. Another intercepted transmission played, this one more formal, deliberate. The guttural tones of a Xan Thar announcer filled the room. "Attention, esteemed hunters. The grand hunt of New Thurman is upon us. The prey is exceptional. Their unpredictability will test your skills and earn you glory beyond measure." Marcus smirked, the faintest hint of satisfaction cutting through his grim resolve. They were taking the bait. The rumors he'd seeded through intercepted communications had worked. He'd fed them tales of enhanced humans, of super soldiers genetically engineered for war. The Xan Thar, always hungry for a challenge, couldn't resist. They thought they were walking into the ultimate hunt. In reality, they were stepping into a trap. But to spring that trap, Marcus needed to be on the inside. He activated the DNA sequencer, the machine emitting a low hum as its sleek alien mechanisms came to life. Placing his hands on the glowing interface, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. The pain hit almost instantly, a searing heat that ripped through his veins like molten lava. His muscles spasmed, his vision blurred, but he held on, gritting his teeth against the agony. Minutes felt like hours before the machine finally powered down, its glow fading to a dull pulse. Marcus stumbled back, his chest heaving as he caught his reflection in the monitor's dark surface. His human features were gone, replaced by the angular, crystalline visage of a Xan Thar noble. His eyes, now a luminous amber, gleamed with an unnatural light. "Not bad," he muttered, his voice resonating with an alien timbre that sent a shiver down his spine. The next step was the hardest. He needed to infiltrate the Xan Thar hunting guild, the heart of their twisted culture. They wouldn't welcome him with open arms, not without credentials. Fortunately, he'd already thought of that. He retrieved a small device from his belt, a holographic emitter he'd salvaged from a downed Xan Thar scout. With a few adjustments, it projected a shimmering sigil, the mark of a high-ranking hunter. Combined with his new appearance, it was enough to gain him entry. The rest would depend on his ability to sell the lie. Slipping into the makeshift shuttle he'd scavenged months ago, Marcus powered up the engines. The cabin shuddered as the craft came to life, its outdated systems groaning in protest. He entered the coordinates for the Xan Thar homeworld, Kraloth Prime, and braced himself. This was it. No turning back. The journey was uneventful, the stars blurring into streaks of light as the shuttle entered hyperspace. Marcus used the time to review his cover story, rehearsing every detail until it felt second nature. He wasn't Marcus Steele anymore. He was Lord Kalor, an eccentric but talented hunter with a penchant for exotic prey. His fabricated exploits were woven from the Xan Thar's own stories, tailored to appeal to their vanity. As the shuttle emerged from hyperspace, Kraloth Prime loomed before him, a planet of jagged spires and shimmering cities that sparkled like diamonds against the darkness. The Xan Thar's opulence was on full display, their wealth and power built on the blood of countless worlds. "Here we go," Marcus muttered, his voice a low growl. He adjusted the emitter, ensuring his sigil was visible, and transmitted his credentials to the planetary control station. The response was immediate, the guttural tones of a Xan Thar official filling the cabin. "Welcome, Lord Kaelor. The Guild awaits your presence." Marcus allowed himself a small, grim smile. The first hurdle was cleared. Now came the hard part. As the shuttle descended into the sprawling capital, Marcus's gaze hardened. The Xan Thar thought they were invincible, untouchable, but he'd show them what it meant to underestimate a human with nothing left to lose. The shuttle hissed as it docked in the sprawling hunting lodge of Kraloth Prime, its engines humming to silence. Marcus stepped out onto the polished obsidian platform, his crystalline form reflecting the soft, ambient light of the Xan Thar capital. The air here was different, heavy with a metallic tang and the faint scent of ozone from distant storms. Around him, towering spires of blackened stone and shimmering steel pierced the sky, their peaks glowing faintly with energy conduits that powered the city. A Xan Thar attendant approached, her scales glinting gold under the artificial light. She bowed slightly, her movements calculated and precise. "Lord Kaelor," she said, her voice a smooth hum, "it is an honor to welcome you to the Grand Lodge. The others are eagerly awaiting your insights for the upcoming hunt." Marcus tilted his head, mimicking the Xan Thar's predatory grace. "As they should," he replied, his voice carrying the same resonant tone he'd practiced endlessly. "My prey has always been exceptional." The attendant straightened, her slit-pupiled eyes flickering with approval. "Indeed, your reputation precedes you. This way, please." As he followed her through the lodge, Marcus absorbed every detail. The walls were adorned with grotesque trophies, skulls of creatures he couldn't name, bones polished to a gleaming white, and holograms of past hunts displayed like art. The hum of distant machinery blended with the soft murmurs of other Xan Thar hunters, their voices a mix of guttural clicks and sharp hisses. The air felt charged like a storm waiting to break. The lodge was the heart of the Xan Thar hunting culture, a place where their elite gathered to boast, strategize, and indulge their twisted obsession. It was also the perfect stage for Marcus's plan. Every step he took was calculated, every movement designed to blend in. He had studied their customs, their rituals, their weaknesses. This wasn't infiltration, it was a performance. The attendant led him to a grand hall where dozens of Xan Thar nobles lounged on ornate thrones carved from alien bone. Their scales shimmered in shades of deep purple and midnight blue, their eyes glowing like embers. At the center of the room stood Grand Hunter Veikor, a towering figure with a cybernetic arm that glinted under the light. His presence was magnetic, his every movement exuding authority. "Lord Kaelor," Veikor said, his voice a low growl that commanded attention. "You honor us with your presence. I've heard much about your unconventional methods." Marcus inclined his head in a gesture of respect. "The hunt demands innovation, Grand Hunter. Stagnation is the enemy of excellence." Veikor's lips curled into what might have been a smile, though on a Xan Thar it looked more like a baring of teeth. "Well said. Tell me, what do you know of this new prey, the humans?" Marcus met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "Enough to know they are unlike anything you've hunted before. Their unpredictability, their resilience, they are not prey in the traditional sense. They are a challenge." The room buzzed with murmurs, the Xan Thar intrigued by his words. Marcus let the tension hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "But challenges are what elevate the hunt, are they not? To face something that defies expectation, that is where glory lies." Veikor nodded slowly, his cybernetic eye whirring as it scanned Marcus. "You speak as one who has faced them firsthand." "I have," Marcus lied smoothly, "and I've studied them extensively, their strengths, their weaknesses. I could offer insights, if you're inclined." Veikor gestured for him to continue, his interest piqued. Marcus stepped forward, his crystalline form catching the light. "Humans are cunning. They adapt quickly to their environment, often turning it into a weapon. They are not the strongest nor the fastest, but their ingenuity compensates. To underestimate them is to invite failure. One of the younger hunters scoffed, his scales flashing a bright red. You give them too much credit. They are primitive. Marcus turned his gaze on him, his amber eyes cold. Primitive does not mean incapable. I've seen a single human outwit an entire hunting party. Their unpredictability is their greatest weapon. Dismiss it at your peril. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the assembled hunters. Vacor leaned back in his throne, his expression thoughtful. And how would you suggest we approach them? Marcus allowed a small, calculated smile. Divide them. Humans are at their weakest when isolated. Their strength lies in their unity. Remove that, and you strip them of their greatest advantage. Vacor nodded, the other hunters murmuring their agreement. The Grand Hunter's approval was a critical step in Marcus's plan. He needed their trust, their arrogance, to proceed unchecked. The gathering broke into smaller groups, each hunter discussing their strategies for the upcoming hunt. Marcus used the opportunity to move through the room, listening, observing. Every conversation provided a piece of the puzzle, weaknesses in their technology, gaps in their knowledge of human behavior. He filed it all away, his mind a steel trap. Later that evening, Vacor approached him privately, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the room. You intrigue me, Kalor, he said, his tone measured. I've seen many hunters, but few who speak with such authority about their prey. Marcus inclined his head. Understanding the prey is the foundation of any successful hunt. Vacor's eyes narrowed, his cybernetic arm flexing involuntarily. You will accompany me on the hunt for New Thurman. I want to see your insights in action. Marcus suppressed a smirk. It would be an honor, Grand Hunter. As Vacor walked away, Marcus's mind raced. The invitation was more than he'd hoped for. Being part of Vacor's personal hunting party would give him access to their plans, their technology, and most importantly, their vulnerabilities. It was the perfect opportunity to set his trap. Back in his quarters, Marcus activated a hidden transmitter embedded in his gear. The signal was faint, but it would reach the resistance fighters on New Thurman. He spoke quickly, his voice low. They're coming. 2 weeks. You know what to do. The reply crackled through the receiver. Understood. We'll be ready. Marcus ended the transmission, his expression hardening. The Xan Thar thought they were embarking on their greatest hunt, but they were walking into a battlefield designed to dismantle everything they stood for. Their pride would be their undoing. As he prepared for the hunt, Marcus couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. They had no idea what was coming. Soon, they would learn what it meant to face prey that had learned to hunt back. The hunting fleet descended on New Thurman in a coordinated spectacle, a fleet of black obsidian ships cutting through the planet's atmosphere like knives. From the observation deck of Vacor's flagship, Marcus stood among the Xan Thar hunters, his crystalline form blending seamlessly into their ranks. Below, the lush, untamed forests of New Thurman stretched endlessly, veiled in early morning mist. The air in the command chamber was thick with anticipation, the alien hunters exchanging guttural clicks and low murmurs as they prepared for the grand hunt. Vacor, towering and imperious, strode to the center of the room, his cybernetic arm whirring faintly. He gestured toward the holographic display which projected the colony's layout with unsettling precision. The prey has been scattered, he announced, his voice a deep growl that reverberated through the chamber. Divide and conquer. We will isolate them, test their resilience, and claim our glory. Marcus inclined his head, masking his smirk. They'd already fallen into the trap. The map displayed decoy positions, fake heat signatures, and fabricated movement patterns. Every element designed to feed their arrogance and lead them deeper into the planet's carefully prepared kill zones. Lord Kalor, Vacor said, turning his glowing gaze toward Marcus, you will accompany my elite unit. I want your expertise at my side. Marcus nodded, his voice calm but edged with false reverence. It would be my honor, Grand Hunter. The Xan Thar hunting parties deployed with militaristic precision, their dropships slicing through the dense forest canopy like razor blades. Marcus stepped into one of the crafts alongside Vacor and his hand-picked hunters. The air inside was tense, filled with the low hum of plasma weapons and the faint, acrid scent of the cloaking tech that shimmered faintly across their bodies. As the dropship shuddered and began its descent, Marcus cast a glance at the onboard holo display. The forest below was alive with movement, thermal signatures of what appeared to be scattered human survivors, running in all directions. In reality, those signatures were dummies, programmed to simulate panic and disarray. The real humans were hidden, watching, waiting. "They're disorganized," one of the hunters sneered, his red-tinged scales flashing. "This will be over quickly." "Perhaps," Marcus said, his tone deliberately neutral, "but humans are known for their unpredictability. Caution would be wise." Vacor let out a low, grinding laugh. "Caution is for prey, Kalor. We are hunters." The dropship landed with a soft thud, its ramp hissing open to reveal the forest floor. Marcus stepped out with the group, his boots crunching against the damp earth. The air was cool, thick with the scent of moss and the faint tang of ionized air from the ships overhead. Shadows danced across the trees as the sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, creating an atmosphere both serene and foreboding. The hunters moved with eerie grace, their cloaking tech rendering them almost invisible against the foliage. Marcus followed, his crystalline form shimmering faintly. He kept his expression neutral, his movements deliberate, even as his mind worked furiously. Every step brought them closer to the kill zone. The first trap sprang with brutal precision. A hunter leading the formation stepped onto what appeared to be a natural patch of ground. In an instant, the earth beneath him collapsed, revealing a spiked pit, camouflaged with local vegetation. His guttural scream was cut short as he was impaled, his blood splattering the pit's jagged edges. The group froze, their cloaking tech flickering briefly as their focus shifted. Vacor raised a hand, signaling for silence. "An accident," he growled, his voice laced with irritation. "Keep moving." But it wasn't an accident, and Marcus knew it. The traps were just the beginning. As the hunters pressed deeper into the forest, the resistance fighters made their move. From the shadows, hidden snipers fired precise shots, the dull thud of suppressed weapons echoing faintly through the trees. One by one, hunters fell, their cloaking tech rendered useless by the ultraviolet strobes hidden in the underbrush. The air filled with the acrid stench of scorched scales and burning plasma tech. "Ambush!" one of the hunters roared, his voice tinged with panic. Vacor bellowed, "Regroup! Find the prey!" The forest erupted into chaos. The Xan Thar, so accustomed to controlling the hunt, found themselves disoriented and exposed. Their neural trackers, once used to monitor human fear responses, now betrayed them. Reprogrammed by Marcus and the Resistance, the devices broadcast overwhelming waves of panic, amplifying their confusion and terror. Marcus moved with the group, his expression carefully blank as the hunters scrambled to respond. "They're using primitive tactics," he said, his tone calm. "Divide their focus and you can regain control." Vacor glared at him, his scales shifting to a deep, angry purple. "You seem unusually composed, Kalor." "Adaptation is key to survival," Marcus replied smoothly, "even for hunters." The next wave of resistance fighters struck from above, descending from the canopy with makeshift explosives and plasma rifles scavenged from earlier raids. The forest was a cacophony of gunfire, explosions, and the guttural cries of Xan Thar hunters falling to coordinated human tactics. Amidst the chaos, Vacor turned to Marcus, suspicion flickering in his glowing eyes. "You knew this was coming." Marcus met his gaze, his expression unflinching. "Of course. But this is what I wanted, to see how they fight, to test them." Vacor growled, his cybernetic arm twitching. "You're too calm for a hunter caught in this mess." "Perhaps," Marcus said, stepping closer. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Or perhaps I'm not the hunter you think I am." Before Vacor could react, Marcus lashed out, his crystalline arm striking with brutal efficiency. The blow landed squarely on Vacor's cybernetic arm, disabling it with a crackling burst of energy. The towering Xan Thar staggered, his eyes wide with a mix of rage and realization. "You traitor!" Vacor roared, swinging wildly with his good arm. Marcus dodged easily, his movements precise and calculated. "You underestimated us," he said, his voice cold. "You always do." The remaining hunters turned on Marcus, but the resistance fighters were already closing in. The forest came alive with the sounds of human victory. Xan Thar weapons turned against their owners, their vaunted technology rendered useless by the very prey they had dismissed as inferior. As the last of the hunters fell, Marcus stood over Vacor, his crystalline form shimmering faintly in the dappled light. The Grand Hunter glared up at him, his pride broken, but his defiance intact. "You think this changes anything?" Vacor spat, his voice a rasp. "We are the apex predators of this galaxy. You're nothing but prey." Marcus leaned down, his amber eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. "Not anymore," he said, his voice like steel. "Now you'll see what happens when the prey learns to hunt." The forest fell silent as the last echoes of the battle faded. The resistance fighters emerged from the shadows, their faces grim but triumphant. Marcus straightened, his expression unreadable as he stared into the distance. This was only the beginning. The Xan Thar had been broken here, but their empire would feel the ripples across the stars, and Marcus would be there, ensuring humanity's rise from prey to predator. The wreckage of the Xan Thar dropship smoldered in the distance, a jagged scar against the dense forest of New Thurman. Smoke curled upward into the pale sky, the sharp tang of burnt metal mingling with the earthy scent of scorched vegetation. Marcus Steele stood near the edge of the clearing, his breath measured but heavy, his body tense with the anticipation of what he knew would come next. Victory lingered in the air, but it wasn't complete. Not yet. Behind him, resistance fighters moved cautiously through the debris-strewn forest, gathering weapons, tending to their wounded, and securing their hard-fought perimeter. Every face carried the exhaustion of battle, but also a grim satisfaction. They had won. For now. Marcus turned his gaze to the shattered form of Grand Hunter Vacor, who still lay prostrate against a toppled tree. His cybernetic arm sputtered faintly, a pathetic mimicry of its former lethal efficiency. The once proud hunter's violet scales were cracked and dulled, his glowing eyes dimmed to a sullen amber. And yet, even broken, Vacor's lips curled into a defiant snarl. "You think this changes the galaxy, human?" Vacor rasped, his voice raw but filled with venom. "You think you've struck a blow that will matter?" Marcus crouched beside him, his knife glinting faintly in the light filtering through the canopy. The blade wasn't raised, not yet. It hovered in his hand, like a question waiting for an answer. "It's not about the galaxy," Marcus said, his tone cold but resolute. "It's about the lesson, one you should have learned a long time ago." Vacor bared his teeth in a grim approximation of a smile. "A lesson? And what lesson is that, pray?" Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. "That predators who think themselves untouchable often forget one thing. Prey adapts. We learn. And when we do, we don't just survive. We turn the tables." Vacor's laugh was harsh, a grinding noise that echoed through the forest. "Foolish sentiment. For every one of me you kill, 10 more will rise. You've done nothing but amuse us." "Amuse you?" Marcus's knife flashed, as he drove it into the ground mere inches from Vacor's head, the blade embedding itself deep into the soil. "Tell me, Vacor, do you feel amused? Do you feel untouchable now?" The Grand Hunter's amber eyes flickered with rage, but he said nothing. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the distant rustling of trees swaying in the wind. A sudden crackle erupted from Marcus's earpiece. He touched a finger to the device, his sharp gaze shifting to the horizon. The voice on the other end was strained but steady. "Marcus, we've detected movement in orbit. A Xan Thar command vessel is repositioning." Marcus rose to his feet, his mind racing. Of course, they wouldn't retreat without a final show of force. The Xan Thar were too arrogant to accept a loss without striking back. His eyes narrowed. This wasn't over. "Evac all non-combatants to the secondary site," Marcus ordered. "Get the wounded to cover and prepare for a second assault." The resistance fighter on the other end hesitated. "What about you?" "I'll handle it," Marcus said, his voice like steel. He glanced down at Kor. "I've got unfinished business." Without another word, Marcus turned on his heel, leaving the Grand Hunter where he lay. The resistance fighters around him parted as he strode toward the command tent. A simple structure cobbled together from salvaged materials, its interior dimly lit by flickering monitors. He studied the feed from their makeshift sensors, his jaw tightening as the readouts confirmed his suspicion. The Xan Thar command vessel was descending into the atmosphere. Its massive silhouette loomed in the distance, blotting out the sun like an unnatural eclipse. It was a fortress, bristling with weaponry and pulsing with alien energy. It wasn't here to reclaim hunters. It was here to send a message. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. He knew what he had to do. Minutes later, Marcus boarded one of the captured Xan Thar dropships, its controls hastily rewired by the Resistance's tech team. The ship's interior was cold and stark, its design alien yet oddly efficient. As he strapped himself into the pilot's seat, the faint hum of the engines vibrated through the hull, a steady rhythm that matched his heartbeat. "You're insane, you know that?" one of the Resistance fighters said over the comms, her voice a mix of admiration and disbelief. "You're going to take on a command vessel by yourself." Marcus smirked faintly, adjusting the flight controls. Someone has to remind them who they're dealing with. The dropship lifted off the ground, its engines flaring as it shot toward the towering behemoth in the sky. Marcus's hands moved with practiced precision, guiding the ship through the turbulent winds. The closer he got, the more imposing the vessel became, a vast monolith of blackened steel, its hull etched with glowing glyphs that pulsed like a heartbeat. As he approached the vessel's underbelly, Marcus activated the cloaking system, the dropship vanishing into the surrounding sky. The Xan Thar's arrogance extended to their own technology. They never considered that their prey might use it against them. He slipped past their perimeter defenses, navigating the narrow access channels until he found an auxiliary docking port. The ship shuddered as it locked into place. Marcus exhaled slowly, his pulse steady as he stepped into the airlock. The hatch hissed open, revealing the dim, pulsating corridors of the Xan Thar command vessel. The air was sharp and metallic, filled with the faint hum of alien machinery. He moved quickly but silently, his boots making barely a sound against the sleek floor. The layout was as he'd expected, cold, efficient, and designed for the Xan Thar's predatory rituals. He followed the corridors toward the central command chamber, his grip tightening on the plasma rifle he'd salvaged from the forest. When he entered the chamber, Kor was waiting. The Grand Hunter stood in the center of the room, his cybernetic arm sparking faintly but functional enough. Around him, holographic displays flickered with images of New Thurman, the colony laid bare beneath the vessel's targeting systems. Kor's defiance was palpable, his amber eyes blazing as he turned to face Marcus. "I underestimated you," Kor admitted, his voice low but filled with venom. "A mistake I will not make again." Marcus raised his rifle, his voice calm but unyielding. "You won't get the chance." Kor roared, lunging forward with a speed that belied his injuries. Marcus fired, the plasma bolt searing through the air, but the Grand Hunter dodged with inhuman agility. The two clashed in a brutal melee, the room filled with the sounds of grating metal and snarling fury. Marcus fought with precision, his every move calculated, every strike aimed to exploit Kor's vulnerabilities. But the Xan Thar was relentless, his cybernetic enhancements giving him the strength to match Marcus's strategy with raw power. The fight ended in a single, decisive moment. Marcus feinted left, drawing Kor's strike wide, then drove his knife into the junction between the hunter's organic tissue and cybernetics. The Grand Hunter let out a guttural cry, his body convulsing as sparks erupted from his failing systems. As Kor collapsed, Marcus stood over him, his breath ragged but victorious. He pressed a button on his wrist device, transmitting a message to the vessel's systems. The targeting array flickered, then went dark. New Thurman was safe. "You lost," Marcus said, his voice heavy with finality. Kor's eyes dimmed, his body slumping lifelessly to the floor. Marcus turned, his boots echoing through the silent chamber as he walked away. The fight was over. Humanity had won. But the real battle was just beginning. As Marcus returned to the dropship, the stars stretched out before him, a galaxy forever changed.